How safe is the food that we consume? Can you trust the labeling on the food packages?
Large companies have global standards to comply with, so they will have very, very high quality standards. Where I see the big challenge is in the small and mid sized kind of manufacturers.
A 10-year-old girl dies after consuming a cake, a woman dies after consuming momos.
Doing risk assessment, doing traceability, that's a big, big gap in India.
We have about 10 million street vendors and
Yeah.
hawkers across the country. When we compare the street food that we get here versus, say, what is in Bangkok, we see that the standards of safety and quality are extremely different.
If you are putting up a stall, you have to put up your license right up front. And therefore, you know that when you're walking up to a stall and if he doesn't have it, you're like, maybe I shouldn't be eating here.
In India, a certain quality and they are available for better qualities outside the country. Why this mismatch?
I think the global standards for most global food companies would be exactly the same. I think where there are today questions coming up more around is, I would say, not so much around safety, but maybe things like nutritional quality.
Because everyone seems to be claiming to be organic.
We've just launched it like 2 months, 3 months ago, something called Goodness Meter. Got a QR code. The consumer can just transparently scan the code and it tells you everything about the product.
To discuss all this and more, I have with me Rinka Banerjee, founder of Thinking Fox and external R&D infrastructure for F&B. Hello and welcome to What India Needs podcast with me, Shutapa Paul. Is there anything more glorious than food? We eat to live, and for some of us like me, we live to eat. But how safe is the food that we consume? Can you trust the labeling on the food packages? That street food that you're eyeing, can it get you killed? To discuss all this and more, I have with me Rinka Banerjee, founder of Thinking Fox and external R&D infrastructure for F&B, and she will be answering all these questions and also discussing the future of food with us. Thank you for joining us, Rinka. Thank you for joining us on What India Needs podcast, Rinka.
Thank you so much, Shutapa, for having me here.
So I'm going to start with the most simplest but the most loaded question.
Okay.
How safe is our food? And the reason I ask is because the numbers are quite frightening. I mean, FSI enforcement data, again, this is a little dated from 2018-19, tested about 1.06 lakh food samples and found that 15.8% of these were substandard, 3.7% were unsafe, and about 9% had some labeling defects. And I'm sure these are not the latest data, but
Yeah.
so starting the first question with the simplest and, as I said, loaded one. How safe is the food that we consume today?
So I think, Shutapa, let me start with saying that we've made progress as compared to maybe 20 years ago. If you ask me the same question, I would have said I would be extremely nervous about it. But today, I think we have gotten better because our standards at least have been put in place. And I think that's, as far as FSSAI is concerned, they put in the, good quality standards, which was linked well with, some of the global standards and stuff like that. I think where the challenge I see in India is the execution of it, right? So, like you said, we've done testing now and we've got a lot of data, which is fantastic. At least we have data to talk about, right? But the issue is that we've seen, especially with the food industry being a lot of it being small, mid-sized kind of industries. It's adoption, it's execution, guiding them in the right way. That what is the minimum things that you need to do to be able to make sure you're, having a safe product and safe food in the market. So I don't think it's so much about the manufacturers not wanting to do it. It's sometimes not really knowing exactly how to do it, right? I think so. That's one challenge I see is more in terms of execution of the standards, and that's where I think a lot more work needs to be done. So it's good that we've started doing analysis of it. It's good that we have standards. What's missing is the in between piece. Is really saying how do you make sure that most manufacturers are aware how to do it, what needs to be done. If they have challenges and questions, etc., who do they go to, right? So I think that's a space that I see more work needs to be done to make sure that we have safer food. The second thing that comes to my mind is actually our ability to assess risks. And we, I think, are still early as compared to maybe some of the other countries where they really assess risks through the entire value chain. Once your agricultural produce has got harvested, from there it comes to the manufacturing, from manufacturing to the trade and consumer space, right? And really doing a proper risk assessment of it, and then saying what are the things that we need to solve for. I was talking to a company 2 3 days ago, and we were talking about the fact that it was about frozen food. Yeah. Now you'll see in India, most of the retailers, a lot of them, would switch off their freezer in the night and go,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So while the manufacturer might have done a fabulous job of getting a great frozen product in the retail shop, but at the retailer level, how do you ensure that they are compliant to some of these things, right? To ensure that that safety disruption doesn't happen. So there's a lot of that in terms of execution, I would say, would be one big area.
So clearly there is a gap between the regulator and obviously the industry. Who do you see bridging this gap? I mean, do you see private players? Do you see think tanks, food activists? Who comes in and bridges this gap?
It's a little bit of everything, but I would say one of the things that we've seen, at least, and I've seen outside India, for example, is a lot more of positive reinforcement through bodies who can certify safe food. So there's something called the Global Food Safety Initiative. It's GFSI. In fact, if you see that they do have certain things about looking through the food safety standards, and they actually do a compilation of all the food safety standards around the globe and come up with a common framework for food safety, right? Based on that, they're able to assess products, give a certification, give a logo in the front. So it gives a lot more branding, thing for a brand to do. Say, my product is A certified, whatever, in safety. So that's one thing I would say. From an activist and influencers, etc., I think the fact that people are talking about it today, and a little bit more on the nutrition side than safety, and I would love some conversation on safety as well,
Yeah.
is at least it's bringing the conversation on the table,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's very important as well. But it's also like industry experts. I mean, like veterans like me and many other people who have the ability to train, have the ability to educate a lot of these small mid-size manufacturers. Large companies have global standards to comply with, so they will have very very high quality standards. No two ways about that. Where I see the big challenge is in the small and mid-size kind of manufacturers who want to do it, right, don't know how to do it, and they need to go and reach out to the right kind of people to be able to do so. A little bit of mix of everything, I would say. um, but yeah, I think I agree with you that bringing quality and food safety on top of our mind when it comes to food in India, I think it needs to be high up there as compared to some of the other, global kind of benchmarks, I would say. You know?
Yeah, because a lot of the global, we will talk about global
Yeah,
companies because where they are acting well on certain counts, there are still certain
yeah.
areas of concern. But the mid-size food companies, food processing,
Mm,
packaging, even restaurants
yeah,
that we see, some of the incidents that are coming out are shocking and scary.
yeah,
A 10-year-old girl dies after consuming a cake. A woman dies after consuming momos. Worms found in pizza. Dead mice found in food. I mean, this clearly is a health hazard, and somewhere this is an area of concern for everyone, not just the regulators, but all of us. But again, how do you bridge that? I mean, how do we reach that many people, that many businesses and
yeah.
restaurants?
No, so in fact, a couple of years ago, and I think it's even now that they have the Eat Right movement, which the food safety standards did that, and really about going out there and educating a whole bunch of the hawkers and restaurants and things like, which was a fantastic initiative. Where it needs to go better is to be consistent, and it's to keep doing it for a longer period of time and making sure we're able to do more of that. So there is trainings etc happening, and I think that's a good thing. And again, I'll come back to the point around execution. I think that's where a lot of the challenge happens. And I'll tell you one of the things that I see a lot of is, for example, the FSSAI asks you to have mock recall procedures, which means, when I say mock recall, which means let's assume that something goes wrong. Yeah, consumer picks up and they have worms in the pack. Let's say that's going to be a recall that you mock up. How are you going to recall that product? What is it that you're doing to ensure that it is, like you have really traced back all the ingredients that are coming in, your processes, making sure it doesn't happen? So they have put the procedure in place. Now, when I go and talk to a lot of factories in India, they're like, really, so what do we do about it? Why do we need to do it? Things like that. That's where the challenge is. It's like we've done a fabulous job of putting standards. It's really about adoption. It's about a lot of the manufacturers needing to understand why it's critical. And it's good that and I mean, it's unfortunate that such incidents happen. But these incidents, I'm hoping in some ways, is getting that consciousness and also the manufacturers. Because everybody says, yeah, I've made a product, I've got an FSCI license, why do I need to bother about these things? So now doing risk assessment, doing traceability, that's a big, big gap in India, right? Tracing back your materials that are coming in from, I mean, some people, of course, go all the way to farms and things like that. I'm not saying you go all that far as well, but even to understand that when my product, my potatoes have come from wherever, right? Is it of the right quality? Is it safe? Have I made sure that safe ones have gone into my manufacturing system? If I have a consumer complaint, how am I supposed to deal with it? I ask manufacturers saying, okay, you've got a consumer complaint. Did you do a root cause analysis of this? Why did this complaint happen? Where did your raw material go wrong? I find that a big gap in understanding. So I think we have a very big job to do in terms of being able to educate, but also get execution in these factories. And I don't know if it's always about, the regulators coming and saying, we'll close this factory down and if it doesn't comply. Yes, you need to do that. But at the same time, is there any positive reinforcement you could do? So, which is why I say GFSI putting certifications, saying, this has got an A class certified factory, for example, I mean, that's nice. It's nice branding opportunity for the company, right? So I think those are the kind of things I would say we need to do.
But branding and running a brand building
Yeah.
company myself, I know that people want branding when mostly they are at a certain stage.
Yeah.
MSMEs play a huge role
Yeah.
in the food sector here in India, and most of them are not at a stage where they care about
Yeah,
the branding,
exactly.
right? So, do you think that along with the certification, if there was, and obviously positive reinforcement is great, some kind of subsidy or
Yeah,
SOPs or
absolutely.
something that comes in, because the MSME segment in general is very strained in the country. Food sector would be no different. So, do you think that could be a positive reinforcement, some amount of?
Absolutely. I mean, any kind of incentivization always helps. And I think, that would be a good space. And I would say in that, I'm just going to add another layer of sustainability.
Yeah.
If people can reduce waste, if people can make sure they have more of what we call as a circular kind of economy in some ways, but really about using all your waste
Yeah.
materials, things like that, those are all good things to incentivize. So, yes, I would say any kind of a financial benefit is
Mhm.
always helpful. But the other thing I would also say, Shutapa, is that there is such a huge opportunity for them to cater to large customers,
Mhm.
for them to cater for exports.
Yeah.
More recently, we've been working with a few mid-sized kind of factories and companies where it was very interesting to see that Walmart, for example, from the US has actually come down, looked at multiple companies and factories in India to say, how can they bring in products from here? So if we can produce high quality products which can get
Mm.
exported, you get much better value realization from it. So I think there is a lot of, commercial benefits of doing
Right.
this.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. And sometimes it's as simple as explaining to them that look, this is the potential,
exactly.
business potential that you create if you kind of adhere to these norms or these standards.
Yeah.
When you meet, now this I'm asking out of curiosity
Yeah.
because you're doing this on a daily basis. When you speak to mid-sized companies, especially the ones who are not at the scale to even export,
Yeah.
say for
Yeah.
example, how do you see their general attitude? Are they more open, willing to understand and imbibe these standards? Or is there a general that, oh, this means more money being spent? So,
Yeah, it's more of the latter. I
yeah,
have to say
yeah.
this. That, yeah, I mean, quality is always seen as a cost. It's going to be costing me so much. How am I
Mhm.
going to even realize all of that? Things like that. But that's where I think it's the responsibility of people like us, a lot of industry veterans, I would say, is also to say that not everything costs money.
Yeah.
I was doing a master class a couple of years ago. This was during COVID, in fact, where I had got one of the food safety experts, and he was from Australia and he's been working in India for a long time. So he was trying to just do a master class with people saying, you just walk into a factory and you say, this is the quality policy, this is what we do, this is putting some systems. It doesn't cost you anything. You just go, you get a nice little thinking, just print it out. But when you walk into the factory, you've got a culture of quality, right? That doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
And that understanding is still really weak in India. We still
Yeah.
have a long way to go, you know. And I mean, my team's gone and done some very interesting work in rural Chhattisgarh and things like that, right? And just teaching them basics, if I'm doing a jam, and this was like self help groups, just sterilize the bottle, put it into a pressure cooker, just heat it up, and it'll be sterile. And you fill it at this temperature. That's all you need to do. And they understood that. So it's sometimes about really simplifying and explaining things in a very simple manner. It doesn't have to be all this big, huge, very mystical thing.
Yeah.
That's quality and food safety.
I
Yeah,
love the fact that you said culture of quality
yeah,
because so I travel. I mean, I love to travel, and I know you love to travel as well. And we love, like, I love my street food,
yeah,
right? And when we look at the scope that we have in India, we have about 10 million street vendors and
yeah,
hawkers across the country, and numbers are probably growing. And when we compare the street food that we get here versus, say, what is in Bangkok or anywhere else just in Southeast Asia, we see that the standards of safety and quality are extremely different between what we get here and there, and it was not always the case. We've had, and we still have, very safe street vendors also who've been there for a long time. But this is a big problem as well. How do we circumvent this issue of the street vendor and hawker? How do we bring this culture of safety
yeah,
right down to the grassroots?
yeah, yeah. No, so, and I think that's where a little bit of uh, you know, again, I would say incentivization helps. But I think even simple things like when you have a street hawking, like a stall, people will get some basic license, and a lot of them may or may not as well. But how do you make it mandatory that if you are putting up a stall, you have to put up your license right up front, right? And therefore that when you're walking up to a stall and if he doesn't have it, you're like, maybe I shouldn't be eating here,
Mm.
right? How do you make that important? And I'm sure, I think as per regulation you're supposed to, but how many people have it there, right? How do you
It's also
ensure?
politically very difficult as a subject to touch in most of our states and cities, right?
Yeah,
Because that's giving livelihood. So if they
yeah,
don't have a license and they're not putting up their business, it creates
yeah,
that. Well, in that case, it's the government
yeah.
there who has to make sure that they're making it easy for them to get the
Absolutely.
license.
No, and that's what, in fact, they've done that. So like if you are a stall, or I mean, I think you just the licensing is absolutely simple. You just need to put something on the system, and it gets you in within hours or maybe a couple of days. And if you're less than 25 lakhs, if you're less than 1 crore, so they've given those buckets. So I think the framework has been set up, the standards
Again,
have been set up.
yeah.
It's just a question of how do you adopt it, etc. The other thing that you see in, let's say, you talk about Bangkok, you go there, and there's the way you set up a process of setting up the stalls, and then the evening everything is cleaned out, it's shut down, there's food security there, and I say that's very important from a safety perspective. And that's one thing, if you see, global standards talk a lot about food fraud,
Mm,
right?
right.
How do you ensure that somebody else doesn't come and put in something else into your product, right?
Yeah.
How do you avoid that? We need to work on that. I think that's another space. And that's where, again, a lot of this open food that is
Yeah.
sold, right?
Yeah.
How do you ensure that it's not getting contaminated? Something has not come from somewhere else, So, but then if you look at, let's say, Bangkok, Philippines, and I've been there. Trust me, I mean, I remember going there and I'd gone for work, and we were all coming back at about 10:30, 11 in the night. There was a whole, trucks and everything just cleaning up the streets, making sure where you had the street hawkers, etc. All the streets were clean, things were cleaned out, all
Wow.
done. So next morning you come, you again opened up. So I think we need to set up those systems. Of
Yeah.
course, they cost money,
Yeah.
but some of those things would be useful because implementation of that is like super critical.
Yeah, yeah, and absolutely. I mean, just basics
Yeah,
also, right? As you said, clean up, lock up, keep everything safe, cover the food. I mean,
exactly.
we live in some of the most polluted cities in the world are here in India, and our street vendors are, selling fruits and cut vegetables, and I don't know, all manners of street food and chaat and everything. It's all open.
Yeah,
Gloves, covering your head. I mean, these are basics. Washing your hands. I mean, we did that for COVID. We got everyone to wash their hands. So it's not
exactly.
impossible,
Exactly.
right? But
I
it
mean,
definitely,
no, none of us wore masks, until a couple of years ago.
yeah,
Everyone, you go to planes, of course, people don't do so much, but still, I mean, people are becoming a lot more careful now.
yeah, yeah,
And on this topic that you talk about, making sure that you at least close your food, things like that, it's also important for packaged food, you know. One of the things that I have seen is, and I tell this to people, that how do you evaluate a good food? It's of course got nice branding, if it's got a nice packaging, you say, oh yeah, the brand has put in the effort to do it. But one of the biggest issues that we see, that I would say in India, is two things: pilferage, where you can, we've had instances where you have something which has just crawled into the pack, although it was nicely sealed and sent out of the factory, maybe in a warehouse or somewhere. That's one thing. And the other thing is fake, right? Fake is a big challenge to solve for, right? So I think these are things that we need to be a little bit more conscious of. And I don't know, somewhere I think I always believe that positive PR always helps, right? So, I mean, we did this whole stuff around polio, we've done stuff around that where we've had adoption. Like you said, COVID, a lot of positive kind of reinforcement helped. We need something like that around food safety, quality, absolutely
yeah.
important.
And we'd want it to happen without a very difficult global emergency forcing us to do it,
Exactly.
right? I mean, if it happened voluntarily and made us take on a different culture,
Yeah.
a slight shift in how
Yeah.
we see. So moving on, and let's talk about the bigger companies. And of late we've seen many of the larger companies also getting hauled up.
Yeah.
We've had Nestle, Maggie, etc. On the ingredients, on the quality of products of MNCs, which are in India a certain quality and they are available for better qualities outside the country. Why this mismatch?
See, I think standards are the same. And I would say again, I think we will come to the exact interpretation of this. But I think the global standards for most global food companies would be exactly the same. It wouldn't be different. I know I've worked in a large global food company, so I can say that for sure, right? Um, there are certain things when it comes to food safety. You have certain local regulations to go after, and those are all fairly well linked with whatever is the global standard. So I don't think that's the challenge. I think where there are today questions coming up more around is, uh, I would say, not so much around safety, but maybe things like nutritional quality, right? Or maybe ingredients that we're using, right? Um, where you may say that, baby food, for example, right? It's got sugar as the first ingredient, but it does not have it anywhere else in the world, and things like that, which is fair. It's a fair thing to say that you need to have uh, cleaner, healthier foods in the country. But also, let's remember we are a country for whom affordability is extremely important. Right now, I can have a EU quality product, but if it's going to be selling to me at a price that I can't afford, I don't think that would make sense. And when I say quality, what cannot be compromised is safety. That's for sure, right? And that I don't think some of the large companies do. Where I think there is an opportunity for them to play is to be able to say that, am I being able to bring in my global standard products which are catering to a much larger set of consumers? Now, I might have a product which is, a more mass market product where, yes, there's sugar, there's all of that, but I'm also declaring it. It's right there in the front and things like that. But I also am bringing in products which may be organic, which may be without any sugar, it's clean label and all of that. And there is a set of consumers in India for that. So we
Correct.
need to be able to make sure we are able to cater to the needs of the different
And
kinds
that's
of
the
consumers.
conversation that is being had now. And I'm glad you mentioned something which I was coming to, which is front of pack
Yeah,
labeling. And this, I mean, for our audiences who are listening to this and probably don't know, in India, we still have a very strong food lobby that is not allowing front of pack
yeah,
labeling, which the developed world, like France, for example,
yeah,
has front of pack labeling. It's color coded. So basically, it tells you that what is healthy, what is
yeah.
unhealthy in terms of food. And it's right there, smack in the face. It's not cleverly hidden at the back. But this is something that the food lobby here is majorly pushing back. Do you see front of pack labeling ever becoming a reality here in India?
I think it will and it should.
But
And
you
if you
do
look at
believe in positive PR, so I'm sure.
yes, yes, I think
Yeah.
I do. And I mean, if you look at, in fact, the last ones I remember was Singapore, and then they, did the Nutri score, right? So you have your A, B, C, D, E
Yeah.
grade, and we do work with a lot of startups and things like that. So, and there was one person that I was working with, and she said my product has to be in Singapore, and I have to be B because I can't advertise, I can't do this. And I said that's good because she's already designing her products to make sure that it is meeting certain standards and things like that. So I think it's a good thing to do to have certain ways it makes it easier for the consumer to choose. Now the way I see it is you know how are you empowering the consumer to make the choice, right? Let's not make this judgment on whether a product of A or B or C is good for you. And healthy as a word, I'm a little, I stay away from it. I say, is it healthier is a different word that I would say. Am I making a healthier choice today? I might be okay to have a bag of chips tomorrow, that's fine, but am I making a healthier choice for something else that I've done? So I think it's about empowering consumers to make healthier choices, and I think that's important. But yeah, I mean, doing some of these things like health star rating, I think that's another very nice way to look at it. Where you just look at certain things about the negative nutrients, so less of it, less of sugar, less of saturated fats, but also positive nutrients, like protein. You've got more protein, you've got fiber. I would say we need to also incentivize that, right? And I'm not saying that something which is loaded with sugar, and just because you've got protein and I say I'm a high protein product and I'm a healthy product, absolutely not, right? So you need to be able to have a balance of both what we call as negative nutrients and positive nutrients, right? So most of the nutri scores etc are usually around negative, but I would say it's also important for us to bring a little bit of positive as well in there.
Absolutely, and I completely agree because when I was, as I mentioned France, and I saw the packet of chips and it was absolutely color coded junk. I still had it. Not
Yeah,
gonna have it every day, but it's good to know what the choice is in your hands. You're not being misled,
absolutely.
and that brings me to the misleading claims. And the next one really bothered me because I work out, and protein shakes are a big thing. And recently we had another study which said that a majority of the protein shakes have false claims. And not just that, many of the other food, I mean, are we truly consuming organic food? I mean, that
Yeah.
is a huge area where we see false claims. So where do you see that becoming less now? How do we counter this? Again, regulation comes in, I'm sure,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No, I think misleading claims in advertising is an important area that we should look at. I think when the FSSAI, almost it's been what, about a decade or so, that they bought the claims and advertising guidelines, which was a good thing to do to at least get started. So the industry started to align itself in terms of what I can say, what I can't say. When I say a nutrient content claim, which means it has so much protein, versus saying it's a nutrient function claim, right?
what
One
does that mean?
I'll tell you what it means. So let's say protein, it has so much protein. That's a content claim, right? And I say protein is good for this. Protein helps you in muscle recovery. Protein helps with this is that's a nutrient function claim. What's the function of that nutrient, right? So there are those differences that they made out in the regulation, which was a good thing to do. But when it comes to interpreting that and saying, um, I'll give you an example, right? I mean, and me and my nutrition director, we often to talk about this is there is a lot of there's a fine line between saying it's a ingredient claim and it's a product claim. We've had many brands come to us saying, oh, I've got this claim on my product does this and this. I said, that's fantastic, but do you have something to prove that your product does this? you know Clinical trials, do you have that? Versus saying my product has ashwagandha or it has protein, and protein is good for this, ashwagandha is good for this. I get that. You can put that on your label, but don't go out there and say your product does that just because it contains it, right? Your product may be exceptionally high in fat and saturated fat and whatnot, but it has got ashwagandha, and I'm just making that up as an
Yeah.
example. Do you say your product is healthy? No, you don't. That fine nuances, a lot of people don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that I find that a bit not scary, but it's something that I would like to really, sort of help there, because I think just it's important for brands to know that, or manufacturers and so on, to know when does it start becoming misleading,
Yeah.
right? You can have products which is designed for small kids. What kind of marketing do you do to small kids? Products which is for those kind of, for young kids and things like that, right? How you're ensuring that you're not encouraging them to have high sugar kind of stuff just because it's got something that gets you stronger bones, for example. So that's a little bit of responsible
And
marketing as well.
ethics, yeah, a
Yeah,
lot of ethics. And I think in India, again, this is my personal opinion as well, we don't see a lot of litigation around
yeah,
food, right? I mean, we see with the large companies where somebody's suing someone, or some court is cracking down on Patanjali because they've had misleading ads, something of that
yeah,
magnitude. But at our level, if we look at the consumer courts, we don't really move the consumer courts until, God forbid, there's been a huge
yeah,
incident like
yeah,
somebody dying, and then it's a criminal matter as well. So a lot of companies get away with misleading us.
yeah,
There is now a huge fad of organic.
yeah,
Vegetables are coming stamped organic. Your e-commerce
yeah,
is sending it to you, your quick commerce is sending it to you, and you're getting it online.
yeah.
And same with all the other products. It's organic, and there's a certification. But I feel that we need more responsible certification there, because
Correct.
everyone seems to be claiming to be organic.
Yeah,
When we had that ISI mark, even
yeah.
now we have it, and we know that that is a mark of trust, and you depend on that. Do you see something like that in this space
Yeah, no, I
emerging?
think it's you're absolutely right. I mean, it's important to get the certifications and somebody else to validate that the
Yeah.
certifications are actually right. And you have test houses and things like that. And I'll tell you something that we have tried to do, and I mean, I was thinking about this a few years ago, saying how do I make something which is simple for a consumer to understand, that is this food safe, is
Hmm.
it clean, is it healthy? So that's when worked on it for a few years, and now we've just launched it like 2 months 3 months ago, something called Goodness Meter. And
Right.
what I said is actually it's important that I empower consumers to make that choice. Right
Right.
now, I'm an industry veteran. We've got other industry experts who have actually gone through this whole validation tool, and it's an online tool which customers can directly, or brands can go and put their products in, put the certifications, let the experts review it,
Yeah.
right? And based on that, say whether a product can carry that logo or not. It's a Goodness Meter logo, it's got a QR code. The consumer can just transparently scan the code and it tells you everything about the product. It tells
Right.
you whether it's got used clean ingredients, how much did it score on food safety, what in terms of claims, etc. Has it been read through? Is it correct? So that's one way to do it. That you have a certification which makes it super easy for a consumer to just scan it and say, this makes sense. And that's where technology and stuff like that will be a useful thing to do. So that's one way to make it easy for consumers. The other is, especially I see as a challenge, is a lot of stuff that's actually thrown out in the social media, right? It's not easy to go and screen through everything, in terms of putting down what you can say and not say on social media. So I would say that would be a good thing to look at, and especially for a lot of online players like e-commerce players, to see that they have that as some kind of a criteria before it gets listed on their platforms. So they look at an FSSAI license, they look at certain, quality criteria and stuff like that. But I think it's important for somebody to validate that these claims are real, right? So that it's not the consumer is, it's super difficult if you're going to tell me that, oh, I need to now read through this, then I need to figure out whether this claim is right or not right. That's like, that's not my
Yeah.
job, as a
Yeah.
consumer to do.
Yeah.
That's your job to do as somebody who makes it, right? So I think putting in those kind of systems, one is simple, like logos, things like that. Like I was saying, goodness meter, stuff like that, which makes it easy for consumers. So that's one way, Nutri-Score and all that. The other, and it would be nice to have something which can actually, like a Nutri-Score, goodness
Yeah.
meter, which can say claims and say, you know what, this is fine, this is good.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
just go ahead and buy it, right? So that's
Yeah.
one thing to do. And second is really to, um, especially on these informal platforms like social media, etc., to really talk about how do you ensure that consumers are able to make out whether this claim is misleading or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
You know?
And the thing is, you're right. I mean, most 99.9% consumers will not go through the labeling.
Yeah.
Definitely not back of pack and looking at everything. It's only few of us who are extremely curious or you know picky about
Yeah.
what we're consuming, that we might look at it. It's about making it easier for them to get that information
Correct.
without becoming investigative journalists or detectives, right? Looking for what's there. Um, Coming to the GFSI aspect, which you mentioned, and India ranks 68th
Mm,
out of 113. So we
mm.
are rather poor on that, on another global index, and therefore we are having this conversation. But when you look at all the other countries, which country for you would you say has done a good job? And of course, we know the developed world.
Yeah.
So one from the developed world and one from the emerging nations. Um,
So I would say in Southeast Asia, a lot of the countries are doing a pretty good job. So if you look at Thailand, Vietnam, very interesting that they're putting in a lot of effort around getting safe, quality food, and in fact, even the street hawkers, things like that. If you walk around, and I was in Ho Chi Minh like last year, and I was very impressed with the quality of food that was there on the street, even the smallest of restaurants, right? And again, like I said, they had their licenses in place, they had certain do's and don'ts in place. It was, just this is just when you walked in there, you knew that this is good. It's fine. I don't have to be worried about it. So I would say some of the Southeast Asian countries from a developing economies are actually doing a pretty good job of that. Brazil being a very interesting country as well. They're doing a lot of changes, a lot of stuff that they're actually working around there. In terms of developed economies, of course, you've got your US and all of that. But I would say UK, Australia, some of these countries are doing, a really good job of being positive about it, right? And also from at a consumer level. I mean, there is a lot, and I think UK, and I remember attending an event last year, and she was talking about how they're going about educating consumers to say, what do you need to see on a pack, right? When you have this pack, how do you need to dispose it, right? It's like how we've been talking so much about waste disposal, and your green bag and your red bag and all of that stuff, which is good, which means we are educating consumers. We
yeah,
need to do something like that in food as well. How do I
absolutely.
make a consumer make healthier food choices? I think some of that in some of these countries like UK, Australia, they're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would say even more than maybe the US and some of the other parts,
Right.
you know.
That's very interesting. So with that, Rinka, we'll move on to our next segment where I want to discuss more about you and your journey. You had a very interesting corporate career, and then
Yeah.
you decided to start Thinking Folks. So tell us a bit about the genesis of the idea and what exactly Thinking Folks does.
Yeah, so I think, Shutapa, I had a very interesting career of about 20 years, 16 years at Unilever. Amazing learnings, a phenomenal company that I, managed to work across multiple categories and, geographies and all that, which was phenomenal. And prior to that, in the US for a couple of years. When I was working very early in my career in the US, I was working for a consulting company, which was right outside of Cornell, Tech Park. We, used to work with the university. We worked with clients like Haagen-Dazs and Slimfast and stuff like that. It's around then I thought that India, sometime I will do this. Yeah. And when I finished my 20 years of working, I realized that in India, we didn't have that infrastructure. in place, which was for external, R&D kind of stuff. You've got institutes on one end, which is very academic. They produce great research. You've got large companies on the other end, which have fantastic amount of investment going into high quality R&D infrastructure and stuff. But India is still a largely an MSME kind of a space, right? So you've got that's when I saw the gap, and that's when I realized that let me take all the learnings I have and put it together and say, can I provide high quality R&D to small mid-sized companies to start with? And that's how my journey started, working with a lot of startups. I've done at least maybe 50, 60 startups, that I've helped build. um, but along the journey, of course, a lot of mid-sized and then larger companies have also come to me, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, that's been my genesis of why thinking folks.
And it's very interesting because startups are changing the game
Yeah.
in all sectors and food especially. And since you've worked and helped build so many of them, tell us a bit about that. How are startups changing the game? What kind of learnings? Any case studies that kind of spring to your mind that you helped
Yeah.
achieve?
No, and I mean, startups has been probably one of my most interesting learnings in the last 10 years. Having worked with a large organization, you kind of tend to look at what you can do, internally and things like that. So, and I'll maybe tell you this story about when I actually started thinking, folks. I was prior to that one, large company. I had everything on, available to me, and then I come out becoming a startup myself.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't have anything, right? You're starting with nothing. And how do you therefore then be able to work with multiple different guys? You build an ecosystem, you collaborate, and you build something quickly. So those are interesting learnings I had as a startup. But working with startups has been the most interesting learning, I would say, because they've been most disruptive, right?
Yeah.
So very interesting new things, new need states have sort of come to place because of startups. Today, when we say that we're talking of healthier snacking, we're talking of healthier noodles, we're talking of protein bars, a lot of that has come from startups.
Yeah.
They've actually helped create that category. And I think that's been the fun part for me to, actually work with some of these kind of companies, to really create these new consumer need states. We've defined these new consumer
Yeah.
need states. I'll tell you, protein bars is an interesting thing, and I remember many years ago when I was working with Yoga Bar, and they launched their protein bars, and, we worked with them at that time. Nobody knew about protein bars and, things like that. But
Mm.
today, and we just finished doing a report with Fireside Ventures called How India Eats, and it was very interesting to see consumer data there. It was, I think, about more than 1,000 consumers were interviewed. Today, Indian consumers are beginning to say protein is good for me. I must choose products which have protein. Now, bringing protein into the consumer parlance,
Yeah.
a lot of it has happened because of brands like Yoga Bar and many other companies after that, who've bought in protein at the forefront,
Yeah.
So I think that's been the exciting part of startups, very disruptive, and really bringing out completely new sort of consumer need states,
Yeah.
like of gourmet popcorn. Nobody had heard about that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's indulgence, it's premium, all that. But hey, today I have the opportunity to have a really nice, I don't know, a nutty tuxedo or some chocolate tuxedo, popcorn or whatever, which
Yeah.
is fun. You've given me a great kind of opportunities to choose from, right?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that they've introduced a lot of new things. And while you were speaking, I was also thinking that many of these new age companies in food especially have also kind of gone back to Indian roots as well. So we
Yes.
have a lot of Indian snacks, our puffed rice, our makhana, in a very nice, innovative, pink Himalayan salt makhana, for
Absolutely.
example, right? But they are healthier.
Yeah.
They are traditionally snacks that we've had, our parents would have grown up having.
Yeah.
And they've also kind of brought in very interestingly, shifted a focus to healthy snacking, which is traditional for us as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a very interesting trend that startups are doing.
And if you see, like, there was a startup which was launched, South Indian snacks, right?
Yeah.
And it's nice. It's good to look at that. But the fact that the change that they've made is to make it healthier, is to not make it with palm oil,
Yeah.
make it with groundnut oil, make it with rice bran oil, make good oils, right? So most of the startups that have come to us in the last 10 years, right, and I've seen most of them come to me with clean label. I want it to be healthier. They're being a lot more purpose driven,
Mm.
you know, having products which is using millets, for example, just being a lot more purpose driven. So I think that's for me been a very, very interesting thing about startups. Just one more thing I might add, what's also added to the success of startups is I think this whole go to market through e-commerce. You know, quick commerce has been a very interesting space in the last few
Right.
years, for a lot of startups to go out there, test their ideas quickly, you know, and then you eventually of course need to have offline, online, etc., but at least online has become a very interesting way to go out there and quickly test out your playbook, as I call it. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. You mentioned yoga bar, and without getting into specifics, but I remember listening to the founder at a panel last year in Bangalore. I think they were there for one of our client partner events, and she mentioned, and I'm sure a lot of them who are into the healthier food, you're not using
Yeah,
preservatives or maybe different kinds. How difficult? I mean, of course, it's difficult, right? Because these are packaged foods. There's a shelf life.
yeah.
How do you, as a company, how what are the innovations that you bring in to make sure that there is as little wastage for them and the food doesn't expire too fast and
Yeah.
yet it's healthy? What is the sweet
And
spot
that's
there?
where I think technology has played a huge role, right?
Okay.
So while the startup ecosystem has generated new need states like fresher food, preservative free food, that's also led for the larger ingredient companies to come up with better solutions. Today I have, let's say, a rosemary extract which can give me the product the shelf life because it stops it from becoming oxidized, which means, you know, fats when they oxidize they've got this strange flavor. So, and that's like, you know, safe, it's clean, it's natural. So that's technology. Today I can have a lot of fermentation. People use that for using certain ingredients which can make a bread have much longer shelf life, you know. So it's great that those need states have necessitated technology to answer to those need states. So I think today that's been a, and that's where kind of we are in between getting the access to these kind of technologies, providing it to formulate the products in that way that can then give you a safe product which is fresher along the shelf life and stuff like that. Yeah, maybe some things like I need a 24-month shelf life, I might still have to heat process it.
Yeah.
But at least for now, you know, and especially with online e-commerce, I can do a product with 6 months of shelf life, 3 months of shelf life, which I didn't have the ability to do 10 years ago.
Right.
So I think all of that is leading towards consumers having, you know,
Right.
these options available today.
Right.
So I think, yeah, I would say it's not that it's not possible to do. Today, there's just technologies have moved in multiple different ways to, you know, get these kind of options.
And logistical support and expansion is
Yes,
helping a lot more, right? I mean, I would
absolutely.
understand, I would assume that if you're stocking online and if you're stocking even with say e-commerce platforms, you're sending a bunch of things and then you're taking it back. In the older days, you were stocking with multiple distributors who were then distributing it
Correct.
further. So that obviously creates a kind of logistical nightmare, which today would be a little more streamlined, I would
Yes,
imagine.
yes, because you have, you know, I mean, yeah, you just have only that much of inventory in your
Mm.
dark stores and things like that. I think that's where the online play is going to be a very interesting space to keep watching out more for. How does it percolate down to tier two, tier three towns as well? Because those
Yes.
are still, a lot of it is offline.
Yes.
You know, so, but
So that concern about food safety and nutritional factors still remains because a large chunk of India will not have access to these products, also because they are more expensive
yeah,
and not everybody is on e-commerce, like not
yeah,
not delivery. But let's come back to thinking folks for
yeah.
a bit. And what's like your forward outlook? What is the most exciting thing that you're working on or something new that we see coming out of there? And then tell us a bit about innovation in food.
Sure.
What is the future of food as you see it?
Yeah. So, you know, like I said, when I started thinking, folks, it was a lot of startups. Along the journey came some online retailers, players. We've been working with them. We work with a lot of large companies as well, where we're doing a lot of acceleration of innovation for them. So today, I think while the startups have created some interesting new products, very agile, even the large companies today have the ability, because of a lot of online play, etc., to
Mm.
go out and test, concepts very quickly.
Yeah.
Now they need partners like us to be able to innovate things at a very high speed. So for us, speed is becoming a very important thing, and that's where we are doing using things like AI, etc., to get speed. The other space that thinking folks as a company, and we're trying to move in that direction, is that in the last few years we've had actually a significant chunk of our business coming from the our clients outside of India. So
Right.
US is our next biggest market after India, and then you got Middle East, which I've just started, Southeast Asia, and so on. And I genuinely believe it's my vision to say it will be made in India. We are proudly Indian, but we serve not just India, but we serve the world,
Yeah.
and we serve the world with very high quality R&D kind of work. Whether it's about creating new innovation portfolios for companies and things like that. So somebody asked me the other day, "Oh, you work for clients outside of India? Do you work because they are wanting to look at India as the opportunity?" I said, "Well, there are some, maybe that's there, but no, we work for solutions that we're solving for their markets,
Right.
because India, we have access to fantastic talent,
Yeah.
Shutapa. I think we've,
Yeah.
and that's been another very interesting journey for me in the last 10 years, that I've 11 years now that I've been doing Thinking Folks. We've trained some of the best, food scientists, things like that, coming from, smaller institutes as well. We've got good quality talent. It's people like us who've got the expertise. How can we put it together for kind of solving for problems which is not just in India but outside India as well?
Correct.
So for me, I think my vision really is for the next few years saying, of course we will accelerate India because I see huge headroom for growth in India. One of our advisors who'd come in from Chicago last year, and he came to India for a full week's visit, and he said, you guys talk about international. India is like where all the action is. I
Yeah.
said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much of growth that, is there. So, yeah, I think these are my two things. One is accelerate India, and the other thing is really, make for the world, but from India.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I think, which is a great goal to set. Future of food.
Yeah.
Tell us, what should we see happening in the next 10 years, both in India and overseas. Love to hear your thoughts.
So I would say a couple of global and India trends kind of merging, and that's something that another interesting thing because of online all that today. A lot of trends are kind of similar. When I work with multiple different in multiple different countries, it's not very different. Health and wellness is going to be probably one of the biggest drivers, right? So consumers wanting to have healthier options is going to be important, and I think it's very important for a country like India, also in another way. India, we have this whole nutrition sort of paradigm, right? We have a bit of a problem. We've got undernutrition on one end where people don't get enough. Yeah. And on the other hand, it's overnutrition, obesity, diabetes, and heart health and whatnot. Right. So we need to solve for both. And I think, therefore, health and nutrition is going to be one big driver for growth in F&B, and I think it's important for companies to start to look more at that. So that's one. The second thing I think is sustainability, and really having a more sustainable food system. And when I say food system, I'm talking about literally from agriculture to consumer all the way, literally what we say as farm to fork. We've spoken a lot about that, but how do you ensure that you've got uh, one is safety, etc., but also that you are minimizing or reducing the amount of food loss and food waste, has a huge environmental impact, has a huge economic impact. you know we did some interesting work for a company in Southeast Asia, and they're the largest fruit processors, where I actually took their fruit waste. What we did was we took their fruit waste streams and we converted them into high value added ingredients. So from banana, you take banana peel, which is thrown away, you convert that into some very low value poultry feed or cattle feed or something like that. What we realize is that thing has a lot of fiber. Now, can you take that fiber, convert it into a high value ingredient, and sell it as a nutritional ingredient, which needs to go in for gut health, for diabetes, and stuff like that? So that's called food waste valorization,
What
as
did
we call
you
it.
convert it? I mean, what did it become
It became
eventually?
a plant fiber, actually. It became a
Oh.
banana fiber. So there's a pineapple fiber that they've
Mm.
done. and which can go into food. It can go into textiles as well, by the way. So you can put in things like that.
Wow.
So food sustainability is going to be a very important piece as well, where you can help uh, consumers reduce food loss, but also companies and industries to reduce the amount of food waste and loss. And
Yeah.
that's something that we are now beginning to see in India. Globally, that's a space where we're seeing a lot more work happening. The third thing that I see is, of course, a lot of stuff around using more digital technologies and things like that.
Right.
So, AI,
Mm.
how do you get much better innovation stuff happening, quality of ingredients and things like that. But I would say, from a trends point of view, health and wellness. For India, I would say the equal opportunity also lies in premium indulgence, by the way. Because
Mm.
Indian consumers, as our disposable incomes are getting better, we're going to be consuming, good, interesting, fine dining food outside home,
Mm.
and we will consume in home as well some good fine dining experiences, right?
Right.
And one important thing that I would say is a lot of the developing countries like India, and we are just recently doing some work for Saudi Arabia and stuff like that. We realize that more women coming in the workforce is going to lead to more um, you know, solutions which are required for cooking, which is
Right.
easier, faster, but at the same time healthier,
Right.
right? Because most of the ready to cook, ready to eat can tend to be nutritionally very devoid and
Mm.
maybe too much of salt, oil, etc., all that. So I think that's an interesting opportunity for us to see as well, that, how do you
Right.
make it more convenient, but it's healthier as well.
Wow. So that's very interesting to know. And we're coming towards the end of our chat, and I could go on and on. But I we do want
Of course.
everyone to consume everything that we are saying here. So um, what are, would you say, the most common myths about certain nutritional myths that you think people should disregard, or food myths, if you had to
So
talk about?
I think, I mean, there are quite a few, but I would say one of the things around sugar. Let me talk a little bit about that. Uh, yes, we talk about refined sugar and unrefined sugars, right? So you say honey, and there is jaggery and whatever. At the end of the day, they are all sugar. Your body doesn't recognize, when it starts to process a sugar, right? Yes, there'll be certain additional benefits maybe of having, maybe like jaggery, for example, does have a bit of iron, does have a bit of other minerals and things like that. The way it probably gets processed or metabolized in the body is a little bit different from the normal refined white processed sugar. But just to say if a product has jaggery means it's good for you, it's a healthy product, and if it's got white sugar, it's not. I think those are the little bit of myths that we need to solve for. It's not necessarily just the type of sugar, it's also the amount of sugar, right? How much is there, right? And so that those are small things that we need to look at. Um, and I would say this is not a myth, but I would say the more whole food that you can have, right? A whole fruit, or like you take dates, right? Now it's got dates. Dates has natural fruit sugars, right? It's not something which is an added sugar and stuff like that. So those are things that people need to sort of be able to make out. But I think that's one, I would say, is a area where people are always a little confused about, saying, oh yeah, it's got honey, it's got this, so it must be healthy. Not necessarily,
Read the whole pack.
read the whole pack, read the whole label,
Yeah.
how much of it is there?
Yeah.
Read that, right? So those are, I think, a few things that we need to be
Yeah.
mindful of, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. So Rinka, last question. Your advice as both as a woman entrepreneur and a professional as well in the industry, to younger professionals who want to come into this sector.
I think, as a woman entrepreneur, I would say, and I've had the benefit of working with many other women entrepreneurs. Yeah. Um, One thing that you will see mostly common across most women entrepreneurs is they have their goals very fixed. They've been fixed in the sense they know that this is where they want to go. And you need to be able to figure out, what is the help you need from all the other people in your ecosystem to be able to get there, right? So I think, that's my only advice that I've had, and to most other women entrepreneurs that I sometimes mentor. I'm part of a lot of these things, like a Catalyst for Women Entrepreneurs. I was part of the UN Niti Aayog initiative for the WTI, which is called the Women Transforming India. which was an amazing experience of meeting 100 other women entrepreneurs. And what we when we all started talking to each other, we found that what was common between all of us was actually the fact that we had a passion, we knew that this is where we want to go, and then we have to be able to figure out how to get help. The other thing that I would also give an advice to most women professionals and entrepreneurs is be clear about what you can do and you can't do, and it's okay to say I can't do it, because we tend to sometimes think that I have to figure this all out. You don't have to figure it all out. And I like what Indra Nui actually says about this, right? That you can't have everything, and it's okay to say I'm not going to have everything, which is all right. So that's as far as women entrepreneurs and women professionals go. But I would say for most people coming into the industry, and this is more about the younger professionals coming in the industry, and I have a lot of them. People who work with me are all in their 25, 30 years age bracket, fresh out of colleges and things like that. I tell them a couple of things. One is never stop learning as well. Never stop learning for sure. um, and in food, there's just so much happening today, whether it's nutrition, whether it's sustainability. Uh, you know, be a little more purpose driven. To come with solutions which is better for people, better for, I would say, and people just say it's only better for people and the planet. I would say it's better for people, better for pets
Yeah.
and the planet. Let's look at the entire well-being, and let's look at solutions which is for all of these things. So I would say for the young professionals, I think they are sitting at a fabulous time right now, where you have so much happening, where you can actually genuinely make a difference.
Right.
And whether it's in the health of a human being or anybody else, and the fact that if you're coming up with technologies and things like that which is actually getting more sustainable practices, lesser environmental impact, things like that, I think that's a great place. So I think, yeah. And the other thing I would say is they just really really uh, imbibe technology.
Yeah.
There's just so much happening today in that space, Shutapa. I mean, and I work with AI. We've developed AI models where something that used to take me 3 months to develop, I can do it in 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah, so we just finished creating a model for protein drinks and bars and things like that. And today, when I get a brief from a client, I'm like, surprised at myself that, oh, yeah, we can actually do this in like 2 days. So I think that technology is moving at such a high speed. I mean, I would say professionals are sitting at an amazing space when it comes to
Amazing.
food.
Amazing. So basically, mind your three P's and work towards that, right? People,
Absolutely.
pets, and planet.
Yes.
Absolutely a wonderful pleasure to have you here on What India Needs podcast, Rinka. Thank you so much for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much for having me, Ashutaba. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you for joining us on What India Needs podcast. Do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave it in comments below and tell us who you would like to see next. Thank you and see you next time.